Evening, everyone, and welcome back to yet another Mindful Monday here at the Metta Centre. My name is Johnny, and it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Eng Kong Tan, who will be our speaker today. So what we have today is a really fascinating. I'm very excited for this presentation. It's a really interesting topic that I think we can all relate to across many aspects of our own lives, and it's about improving relationships by looking at the contributions from both Buddhist and Western psychology. So this will be a really great conversation that we're going to have today. Before I introduce Dr. Tan, what I want to do is just give you a brief explanation of what we're going to be running through and how today's session will work. But before I do that, as always with a lot of these meetings, I'd like to quickly start by acknowledging the country that we're all meeting on today. So I'm coming from the land of the Wadi Wadi people of Dharawal Nation down here in Wollongong, and I acknowledge that there's many of you coming to us from many different lands across Australia and overseas today. So I'd like to pay my respects to any First Nations peoples present with us today and acknowledge the ongoing impacts of colonisation on Indigenous people. So what we're going to be having today is a wonderful discussion about the concept of relationships from a Buddhist and psychology perspective. Now, Dr. Tan is going to speak to us for about 40 to 45 minutes. So we have a lot of time at the end for questions. So what I would ask is during the presentation, jot down or write down any questions that you might like to think of. And then when we get to the end of the presentation, I'm going to prioritize those who want to, either in the room or online, ask their questions in person before I then go through the chat and try to give Dr. Tan a more concise overview of the themes that people are looking at. However, you're probably all wondering, okay, well, who is Dr. Tan? So Dr. Eng Kong Tan is the founder president of the Australian Association of Buddhist Counsellors and Psychotherapists and its first director of training of the Australian Association of Buddhist Counsellors and Psychotherapists 2-year professional training course in Buddhist psychotherapy. He was also a novice monk at Buddhist Vihara in Brickfields, Kuala Lumpur. He was the founder and chair of Metta Clinic, which is an established group psychological practice in Pymble, in Sydney from 1989 to 2022. And he has worked with individuals, groups, couples, and throughout his practice. And also, despite him being retired from clinical work now, he continues to supervise helping professionals in mindfulness practices. Firstly, wow, that is just an absolutely phenomenal level of experience, Dr. Tan. We are truly grateful for you joining us at the Metta Centre today. So with that in mind, I will share my screen, which will have the presentation on it. So please bear with me 1 to 2 seconds whilst this gets set up. And then I'll pass over to you, Dr. Tan, to go through this fascinating presentation. Can I just get a thumbs up that everyone can see the presentation, which should now be in full screen? Great. Dr. Tan, it is over to you.
Thank you, Johnny. First of all, I'd like to thank the Metta Centre, in particular, Tina and Sinsin, for inviting me this evening. I think this is the second or third time in recent years presenting to the Metta Centre. Of course, today's topic on improving relationships, I'm going to particularly emphasize the Buddhist part because this is a Buddhist meeting and the emphasis is on mindfulness as well. So the Buddhist contributions, and mainly from the Eightfold Path, but from time to time I'll put alongside the psychotherapy and counseling field and their contributions. And you wouldn't be surprised, the two overlap and the two can be integrated quite easily. Yeah. So the next slide, I'll jump straight in to all good Buddhist presentations, the Four Noble Truths. So although I'm going to emphasize in some detail the Eightfold Path, how following the path helps all our relationships, we also know that the first of the Eightfold Path actually refers to the Four Noble Truths in terms of the right view. So when we have the views coming from the Four Noble Truths, we're already in the beginning of the path, yeah? And even the very first truth, the truth of suffering. When people who come to me with their relationship problems, when they realize, whether at the beginning or the middle or three-quarters way through the therapy experience, that in fact, suffering is a part of life. We all suffer as long as we're in samsara. And then to actually accept that as a fundamental truth, yeah? That itself already helps enormously, because a lot of angry, a lot of unhappy people always have this feeling of why should this happen to me, you know? How come I'm suffering? And there's always the fantasy, others are not suffering or not suffering as much as I, yeah? Mm. So the truth of the cause of suffering, well, very simply, isn't it? The Buddha has crystallized it to clinging, hating, yeah, and unrealistic expectations under the heading of delusions, yeah. And interestingly, when you look at the world of psychotherapy from Western psychology, when you understand it deeply, it also comes down to these three major areas, of being over-attached, or of not being able to manage our dislikes, let alone our anger, worse still our hate and our rage. And of course, we all have the ignorance of, not only the ignorance of the truth of suffering, but the ignorance of, we all expect to have an easy life. We all expect to have a smooth sailing life, especially when we work hard and we've done what we can and we've listened to mommy and daddy and our teachers and so on. Yeah. The third, the truth of the end of suffering highlights that this is a truth that often needs a lot of painstaking working through and a lot of work, because ultimately we all want to end our suffering. Yeah. So I would humbly put in terms of us mere mortals, and we're not with the monastics here in a sense, that when we reduce our suffering because we follow the path, that is very possible, and that is what we all are doing, yeah? But to completely end the suffering, well, that is the ultimate goal, and I'm sure some of us are already aiming for that, those of us steeped in Buddhist teachings and practices. But that is towards enlightenment. In terms of counseling therapy, the aims are much less in terms of reducing suffering. Yeah. So the path is what leads to the reduction. So let's move on to the next slide on the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah. I would assume that all of you are familiar with these 8 steps, and we will go through them one by one, and we'll see how we go. Yeah. Next. Right. Right understanding. Another version of it is a part of a right view, recognizing there are so many views, there are so many understandings from Buddhist psychology, if you like, from Buddhist understanding of the mind. And all the teachings and all the meditations in Buddhism, they are all towards understanding ourselves and understanding others. And therefore, we could pull out any teaching of the Buddha and we will find it useful for our relationships. So in the main, especially the teachings that recognize interconnectedness, depending arising, and the teachings that emphasize a deep understanding of each other, of both parties. Yeah? Next. And here Thich Nhat Hanh emphasizes very deeply, and this is a very profound statement. Understanding is the other name of love. That's very deep. Yeah? If we don't understand, we really can't love. And this applies to all relationships. Thank you. Te. Next. Right intentions seems to be quite obvious. When we cultivate our good intentions, and a lot of it is based on the 5 precepts, which has to do with, first of all, non-harming, and the 5 aspects of non-harming, the 5 precepts. And then, of course, cultivating compassion, not only compassion for others, significantly, from both Buddhism and psychotherapy, self-compassion. And very often, many of us would admit, and certainly most of the people who come to me for professional help admit that actually the hardest person to be compassionate towards, same with the hardest person for us to forgive, is ourselves. And yet, it is so important to be able to regularly practice, or be regularly reminded of self-compassion as part of our right intentions as well. Yeah. Next. Next, Johnny. Yeah, Sharon Salzberg, whom many of us would have heard on YouTube's, and some of us have already attended her courses on the net. Yeah. Again, paraphrasing Thich Nhat Hanh, that true love is born from understanding. Yeah? Next. Right speech. This is a huge area. And I might say right at the very outset, in the training of therapists and counselors, a lot of it is rightly on right listening, skillful listening. And then the very next step, the next closest step, because it's a talking therapy, yeah? Mainly listening to the talker, who's the one who's seeking help. But the talking, the speech from the therapist has to be trained, has to be guided, has to come from the empathic, the kindness, and the gentleness. It's an inquiry, but it's a very respectful and loving inquiry. Yeah? And a lot of the training and all the years of training as a psychotherapist, and now in me helping others in supervising their work, right speech comes in all the time. Yeah. Of course, from the Buddhist point of view, samma vacha is to speak truthfully, to speak harmoniously, and always to speak beneficially. Yeah? To even ask the questions, what am I going to say next? Is what I'm going to say next beneficial to my relationship with the other? So this is very deep communicating. This is not gossiping. This is not silly talk. This is not uh, just being silly. This is the practice of right speech, skillful speech, that actually deepens and improves the relationship of both parties. From Western psychotherapy, there is one particular right speech that I just want to bring up that's very useful. It comes under the title of non-violent communication, NVC. And those of you who would like to know more about it, you can Google non-violent communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Very simply, a lot of people who come from a lot of unhappiness and a lot of unsettled trauma from the past. They are unaware that the way they are speaking is quite violent. It's not, violent speech is not so obvious as violent behavior, violent actions. But violent speech like name calling, like verbal abuse, like raising the voice, it's always very deleterious for the relationship. So, for example, in nonviolent communication, a simple example will be instead of saying to someone, "You always make me angry," "You always make me angry" as an accusation. We need to learn to change it to very simply, sometimes when you say certain things to me in a loud way, I actually begin to feel upset. Could you help me by first lowering your voice? Now, that's an example of skillful speech, from the world of therapy. Next slide. Right action. Of course, acting ethically, again, the 5 precepts. And in terms of right action, Samma Kammanta, of course, it brings us to the Brahma Viharas, the right actions of loving kindness, between the cat and the hedgehog there, sharing a meal of milk together. The loving kindness of touching, skin to skin, from mother to child, from any two persons who are significant and close to each other and have an intimate relationship, skin to skin touching. The actions that brings joy. This is the happy feet from the movie with the penguins. And those of us who would like to practice more and more right actions in the area of joy, I would recommend you enjoy, if you haven't already got it, the 8 pillars of joy that is in the book entitled The Book of Joy, which is a compilation from a writer, a journalist, who accompanied Archbishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama on the Dalai Lama's birthday. And these are 2 old friends who met together, and they had a lot of fun, and they had a lot of jokes. And the journalist who was with them tried to help tease out from their relationship with each other what might be the pillars of joy. And the book also gives a summary of the 8 pillars of joy. And not unexpectedly, it includes the 4 Brahma Viharas, and includes the virtues and values from the paramitas. Yeah. Next slide. Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded, or between any 2 persons that way, because it's a relationship between equals. Equals, yeah. Pity is different. Pity is somebody on top talking to somebody below. Yeah. Compassion is on an equal relationship. And here comes the kicker. Only when we know our own darkness well, only when we know our own imperfections, our own faults, our own past difficulties, and so on, can we be present with the darkness of others, remembering that there are 2 sufferers in the room. Yeah. So this very realistic, very humble, and very respectful position of the compassionate listener, of the person offering very deep compassion in the relationship, is truly helpful. Yeah. Next slide. Right livelihood is very easily understood. Yeah. We all want to be in livelihoods that follows the 5 precepts. Of course, I'm very fortunate to be in the helping professions, which is being a doctor, being a therapist is in the noble profession, so they call it. But I got to remember the Noble Eightfold Path to remain noble. Yeah. Of course, all the volunteers in the Metta Center, you're doing a lot of good work. You're in the right livelihood, volunteering, offering your help in charitable organizations, joining the RSPCA, helping in the refugee resettlements, yeah, and even growing healthy fruits and vegetables for ourselves or the farmers, for others, or as a livelihood, yeah, reforestation programs, world wildlife protections, and so on. So it's not surprising that many matured adults who are already very happy with whatever job, whatever occupation they're in their later life, when wisdom and compassion kicks in more, they actually purposely spend a significant amount of their time pursuing not necessarily call a livelihood, but an area of work that is ethical and that supports human relationships and contributes to the community in right livelihood. Yeah. Next slide. Right effort. Yeah. And this brings us to mindfulness. In when we put in the right effort in terms of being mindful as well, which we will deal with in the next slide. But the main teaching, there are several teachings under right effort through the Buddha, but the main one very simply has to do with whenever with another, especially our significant others who play a part in our lives, whether at work or at home, is to minimize negativity. It even includes today, there's so much negativity in the news. There's so much unrest in the world. There's so much upheaval. And we are all going through such global anxieties about the imminent war, the war has started, about climate change and so on. Sure, we have to be aware of it, but we don't want to continue just having talks between each other on all these negative topics, to minimize the negativity, to resolve whatever conflicts might come up. And on the flip side, which is very important, which from the world of psychotherapy has only begun recently, but since the day of the Buddha and in all major faiths and spiritualities, the emphasis on promoting positivity. Now there's positive psychology, there is positive psychotherapy. And not only to promote, how to sustain the positivity in relationships. And this leads us to mind training. Next slide, please. Yes, Dalai Lama. I love the way his face always has a bit of cheekiness to it. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. And we can see that humanity right now, even at the global level, is not doing very well. And a lot of spiritual leaders are coming forth to help with the current distress and the current disease in the world by simply emphasizing the values and virtues of being human. And this is fundamentally for all relationships as well. Yeah. Next slide. Right, mindfulness. Yeah. As we all know, the word mindfulness was created by Rice David, and he was a Buddhist scholar, and he was a British gentleman studying Buddhism in Sri Lanka. And when he translated the suttas, into the English language from the word sati, which primarily in those days meant remembering. But when you take the word remembering in the right context, because we all want to remember, mindfulness is only 1/8 of the path. And as the Buddha emphasized, each of the 8 contains the other 7. So when we look at sati, and when we try to translate sati into the English language, the word remember doesn't capture sufficiently the whole of the Eightfold Path. But the word mindfulness captures it much more, yeah? And then, of course, to define mindfulness in a very broad context and in a very therapeutic context. And for this evening's discussion in the context of relationship, it would be being fully present and being fully aware of each other, you know. So when we come to the second half of today's meeting, I'm looking forward to myself, hopefully, mindfully listening, not only to your questions. I hope some of you will contribute with some comments, your comments, your questions, and we will have mindful exchanges, which is the best way of learning and the best way of benefiting in any relationship. Yeah. Next slide. Our Australian famous Buddhist monk, and many of us have met and heard from the teachings of Ajahn Brahm. And when it comes to relationships, he very incisively says, it's never his problem, it's never her problem, or my problem. It's always our problem. Yeah. Here lies interdependence, here lies codependent arising, yeah. Here lies Thich Nhat Hanh's interbeing. We are in this all together. And that's how we solve the problem. Yeah. Instead of saying you are at fault or I am at fault, let's look at how each of us is contributing in useful ways and not so useful ways to the situation that is in front of us. Yeah. Love is the ability to embrace the imperfections of another, of ourselves, and of our life. And in this context, I was sharply reminded, I was at the wedding of my goddaughter last night, the wedding dinner, and the daytime, the wedding reception. And I was very struck, and I've told my wife I'm going to quote her tonight in this talk. When the young couple, our goddaughter, asked my wife and me, can we give them some words of advice for their marriage and their beginnings of their journey in life together. My wife said a lot of very beautiful and lovely things, but what struck me was she actually said to the couple, and remember to forgive each other regularly. Wow! When she said that, I could see my goddaughter's eyes opening wide and taking it in. Because very often in a wedding reception, in all the very positive feedback to the couple and pointing out all the positive points about marriage and about love, which is all correct, true and correct. But in giving advice, perhaps more so privately, it is also important to bring up the more difficult aspects, the more challenging aspects of relationships, which includes the capacity to forgive. Yeah. So what you see in others, that's what they'll show you back. Now, that's a very deep statement from Ajahn Brahm. Yeah? So that also emphasizes that the quality of our relationship is 50-50. It's 50% contributed by you, 50% contributed by me. I say that at the start of every couple I see who've come to me for couples therapy, yeah. Because that straight away helps them not to just simply talk about the shortcomings of the other or just simply focus on all the wrong things they perceive coming from the other, and as if therapy is, if you fix my partner, I'll be all right. To actually see every relationship is 50-50, yeah? Next. Wow, this is a big one, yeah. Johnny, how much time do I have left?
It is just about 7:32, so 10, 15 minutes, 15,
Oh,
20
okay.
minutes, plenty of time.
Oh, okay. Then I can spend some time with this one. Because this one comes to the nuts and bolts of the Buddhist contribution and the psychotherapy contribution. I take it that some of you, perhaps or most of you, would have listened to the story of uh, Kisah Gotami, yeah? And I'm using that sutta from the story of Kisah Gotami to highlight how the Buddha, with his supreme skillful concentration, because of his years of meditation, his years of trying to sort out the causes of and the nature of suffering, um, when Kisa Gotami, whom many of you will remember, was overcome with grief after the death of her only child, and she she brought the dead baby in her hands to seek help from the Buddha. And in those days and times, they're all looking for a miracle uh, to revive her son. Now, very interestingly, the Buddha, instead of performing a miracle, he instructs her to find a household where no one, absolutely no one, has ever died. And if there's such a household, to collect a mustard seed and bring the mustard seeds to the Buddha, and she will help Kisagotami. In, in just that offering, just that guidance, as if this was seemingly a simple task, the Buddha set Kisagotami forthwith to actually experience the universality of death and loss. And ultimately, of course, to lead her to accept and understand the whole of the Dhamma. But as most of us understand, especially as we get more and more senior in years, the central teaching of impermanence and the universality of death and loss, when we not only hear it as a theory, hear it as a teaching, but actually experience it listening to others who have experienced grief. And everybody in every household would have had at least one grief, yeah? So Kisa Godami could not collect any mustard seed, and when she realized that there's no such mustard seed, she then returned to the Buddha and said, "Now I understand, uh, and I place my dead baby beside you, and I want to be your student. I want to be your disciple, and I want to learn some more from you about life." Because she's already done her grief work. In today's terms, in therapy terms, it was the grief work that she had experienced from household to household. And then the deep realization that this is part of life. Yeah. So that's the story of the collection of mustard seed. It touches on the Four Noble Truths. It touches on how we have to accept the universality of suffering, and it brings us to so many aspects of the Dharma. Next slide, please. One of my favorite teachers. In the end, just three things matter. How we all wish we hear this early in our life. How well we have lived, meaning how well we have loved, and also how well we have learned to let go, let go, let go, let go. So easy to say, so much to practice, so much to keep practicing, and so much to work through in the process of letting go grievances, letting go what is not achievable, letting go because we have a deep understanding that we have to accept whatever life offers us, and we have to accept. Yeah, these are the ups and downs of life. Yeah. Next. And on a broader perspective, touching on relationships, yeah, this is what the Dalai Lama shared with his audience on his last birthday. He said, we must combine the material development in the world we have today with the development of internal human values. We need to develop respect, love, and a sense of compassion in order to have happier lives, happier families, happier communities, and finally, a happier world. Yeah. When we need these inner qualities, and he emphasized, and this is very powerful, especially for a large audience, and many of who may not be Buddhist, yeah. And this should be the ultimate goal of education today. Wow, wow. He's really giving a non-secular teaching. He's really speaking to every member of the public on his birthday. And he's really going to the fundamentals of our human values in all our relationships, in our relationship with ourselves, in our relationship with our close ones, at work, and ultimately our relationship with the whole world. Yeah. And we all need to be educated. Yeah. And a lot of Buddhism is actually educating through psychology, philosophy, through the Dhamma, so many pathways to happiness. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, I'd like to end by paying my respects and expressing my gratitude again to my first Buddhist teacher, the late Reverend Dhammananda, the Chief High Priest of Malaysia. I was a novice monk with him, and this was in my second year of medical school. And in the evenings, I would sit beside him whilst he attended to his devotees and disciples coming in one by one or as a couple with their life's problems to chit-chat with him and to receive guidance from him. Not consciously, I realized then that I was already picking up from him, not only the Dhamma, but some of the basic tenets on how to be a good listener, how to be a good counselor, or how to be a good teacher of the Dhamma or relationships or whatever. And this saying from him focuses on marriage. I would like to enlarge it to all relationships. Yeah. Uh, Relationships are actually a blessing, but many of us can, through our own pain and suffering, turn the relationships into a huge problem. Mm. And of course, the material things are not the main cause of any unhappy relationship. It's not money, it's not our titles, it's not all the material aspects. Both parties in a relationship have to learn to share. And here comes Buddhism, the pleasure and the pain. Not just the pleasure, we have to share the pain of our existence in samsara. We have to share the pain of all relationships. Every relationship is fundamentally difficult because it's two persons, yeah, or two parties trying to improve the relating between each other. And this the pleasure and pain of everything in our daily lives. So he again emphasized, yeah, mutual understanding, like all the previous slides of the show, is one of the secrets. The mutual deep understanding is one of the secrets, one of the formulas for happy relationships. Thank you again, Reverend Damananda, for your teachings that I still carry with me and still reverberates with me today, and I share with others. Next slide. So thank you all for listening so attentively and for bearing with me whilst we now progress on to the more lively part and the part that I hope we'll all enjoy and and I certainly will learn more from this session by interacting with yourselves. And please, your comments as well, not just your questions, yeah? Mhm.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Tan. That was an absolutely fantastic presentation. I was quickly trying to make as many notes as I could whilst I was also trying to change slides. So I've been very busy, but it was a really wonderful presentation, particularly to hear how elements of the Noble Eightfold Path can translate really succinctly into navigating what I would imagine for most of us is actually one of the most complex elements of our lives, which is navigating relationships. So there's a few questions that are popping up in the chat. I'm going to synthesize some of these, but in order to give people to think about or to have time to think about some questions that they would ask, I might start with a question that I was having throughout the presentation,
Yes.
particularly when you spoke about understanding
Mhm.
and the need for understanding. What is your advice for approaching all of these tenets when we're dealing with someone who might be hostile? So it's not necessarily someone who just isn't listening to us, but actually there's aggression or there's hostility.
Yes, it comes under the rubric of violent communications, isn't it? So when someone is already obviously hostile towards us, we can't even begin to practice, in a sense, the Noble Eightfold Path as much as we would hope to, because we actually very gently, very respectfully has to help the hostile person first become aware that as much as they seemingly want to relate with us better, or whoever they're relating with, they are already coming through a channel that doesn't help and in fact is contrary to helping the relationship. So if it is between you and this particular hostile person, it comes up through your nonviolent communication to him or her in terms of, I wonder whether you are aware that when you just now said to me, da 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 da, di 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 di, it could be coming from someone, and sometimes it can even come from me in a very angry, hostile way. And I'm still recovering from your aggressiveness, and I'm going to take a while first to calm myself and then be able to respond, hopefully, to what the point you might be making. So something explanatory like that to help the other to begin to be aware of their effect on the other, quite apart from the point that they're trying to raise. That violent, abusive language is not helping. But we have to present it in a respectful and appropriate way. If you know that hostile person for a while and you know the hostile person quite well, you are in a better and better position to practice reflecting back to him nonviolent communication. And in your nonviolent communication, you're also setting an example of speaking in a nonviolent way. Thank you, Johnny, for your very good question.
Thank you so much for that. I'll now pass over to Ellie for their question, then Simran will go to you after that.
Mm.
Hi, my name is Ellie.
Hello,
Can you hear
Ellie.
me? Hi. Um, I am personally studying counseling, and my future, I wanted to become a family therapist, and in particular, I want to become a sex therapist. So, I have personally, I'm getting to a mature age, and I'm in a long-term relationship. Um, I, I did not want to ask you a question, but I just want to put a perspective here is, through our history, I think woman was a possession of a man. So woman's role usually is an extension of a man. So property for a man. And I'm just wondering, often, I feel like I'm start to question a lot of societal values, like a marriage relationship. So even to me, I feel like this man and woman's love, or this relationship, we call them love. I found they are not real love. The real love is even more mysterious from our hearts. I find this this female and male love, I call them like our nature instincts, like a procreation, that type of energy that propel us to find a partner. And then when love disappears, we call them relationship. And we put marriage in place to secure this intangible love. I find a lot of marriage gone sour, a lot of relationship has gone sour, and we're still trying to maintain them in every way we can. For instance, when the relationship has gone sour, the only thing that bonds them, these two hatred person together, is through children, having children together, having a mortgage together, having a comfortable drawing together. But I find this is all the reason this is definitely is hurting the next generation, as well as in long term. I just feel like even the marriage, this thing, I feel this value totally not working for a lot of contemporary thinking, especially when women's economic status is so viable these days that they can just independent be by themselves. And then when love comes, it comes, and when love fades, you just have to graciously just let the love go instead of holding love together, holding that sour relationship together. This is just my intake. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you for contributing so much. And thank you for bringing up so many very cogent points in relationships nowadays between man and woman. I'm delighted to hear that you are training to be a counselor or therapist, and I'm delighted to hear that you are aiming towards a very challenging area to become a sex therapist. Yeah. And what you said just now about the couples and their difficulties, we might just highlight how you're bringing up the very clear difference between love and lust. And very sadly nowadays, in lots of contemporary relationships, um, people actually fall in love because they're lusting for each other. And when the honeymoon is over, so to speak, yeah, when the passions are spent, and now we have to tolerate each other. Now we have to learn to be able to express our justifiable misunderstandings that leads to anger towards each other. How to express our anger in a respectful, meaningful, useful way, productive way is a lot of work through therapy. Yeah? And if I might suggest, Ellie, if you were looking for any suggestions at all, are you already a member of the Australian Association of Sexual Educators Research?
No, not yet. That's the after a bachelor study. Then I need to get the accreditation in order to get into a psychosexual diploma. It's held in University of Sydney. So I haven't had my qualification yet.
Okay, okay. Well, you can look forward to joining ACET. And I was a member of ACET in my
Yeah.
uh, younger part of my 52 years being a therapist. I practiced a lot of marital counseling, and about a third of the couples who saw me in
Mm-hmm.
was referred through ACET, who are they have a very good training program for sexual educators, researchers, and therapists. Yeah. Mm. And on the international stage, you would have come across the Gottmans, John and Julie Gottman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they are the world's leading couple therapists. They have visited Australia several times, run workshops here. I was very lucky to meet them many
Mm.
years ago in one of. So if you haven't, even if you just Google, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
John and Julie,
John and Julie. Mm-hmm.
yeah, um, on marital therapy.
Okay. Home marital therapy. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I personally ask you a question? Um, so I feel like a culture really plays, a huge influence on deciding whether you end the relationship or you still keep the relationship, even the relationship has gone sour. Especially from Asians' perspective, usually they try to put, trying to smooth things out rather than,
Yes.
given them the black and white decision. So
Yes.
what is your do you recommend them to have the black and white decision, or you help them to smooth things out?
It's it's our position as therapist or counselor is never to advise people A or B, black or white. Yeah. The counseling, the therapy we offer is to help them look at their problem from different perspectives, different angles,
Mm-hmm.
respect how they are affected by these different perspectives. And you brought up one that is very important, huh? The cultural factors. Yeah. And you're
Mm.
absolutely right. Um, Asians, generally speaking, find it harder to go ahead with the divorce, yeah, or
Mm.
separation, whereas in the Western world, we already know in America, 1 in 2 marriages ends up in divorce. And most couples, in fact, my predecessor, when I first went to practice, my predecessor was a psychiatrist, psychotherapist, originally from Canada. And one of the reasons he and his wife left Canada to come to live in Australia was all their friends and relatives and colleagues around them. Most of them were divorced or in their third or fourth relationships. And the two of them were the exception to the rule. And feeling very awkward in social meetings. And I mean, that wasn't the main reason, but that was the contributing reason for them to move to Australia. But that's many years ago. But Australia is catching up with world figures in terms of the frequency of separation and divorce.
Mm.
And it's again between 1 to 3 couples to 1 to 2, approaching 1 in 2 couples are separating and divorcing nowadays.
Don't never get married.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So you're raising a very important point there. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much too. Thanks.
Over to you, Simran.
Thank you, Dr. Tan. You mentioned that you were open to comments as well. So that's what I just wanted to share what I took from your talk. I really appreciated what you were saying about compassion and how it's different to pity, about seeing ourselves as equal to the maybe like the other person in the relationship, whoever it is, and realizing that there's two sufferers in the room. And I thought that was really insightful for me because I often have compassion towards others suffering. For example, if somebody just was maybe communicating in a violent way towards me or something, I feel that in my practice, I've got quite good at not really like, having that brick wall in front of me and considering, what maybe is the cause for that and why they're in that condition and not, separating it from whoever that person is, rather the person, but their cause the conditions and having compassion towards their suffering. But I do feel that when I reflect deeply, there is still that perhaps when I'm feeling, they're suffering, there's still this slight in my mind level of ego that I want to try and also let go of, that feeling that, I understand they're suffering. But this, what you said, it really just makes me want to put that mirror and go through, and you are also a sufferer as well. And that having that compassion is that shared understanding that we are suffering. And like I wrote down the quote that you said because I really realized that the more sort of darker experiences I've been through, it's true. You can hold more with someone with their suffering because you know how it feels like. And so I think that from your talk, I will definitely now try to, when I'm having compassion towards other people, come from not this perspective that, oh, I get it, they're suffering, but also that I understand their shared suffering. So that was the first thing I wanted to mention. And the second was about the 3 things about how you lived, how you loved, and how well you learned to let go. Because one thing I often questioned was about having relationships and loving in a manner that doesn't, I would say, increase attachment and those sorts of desires and being skillful about that. And I feel that that encompasses quite well that you can still live and love, but in a manner where, like that quote says, that if you really love someone, you can learn to let them go. And I think to me, that resonates with this idea of not trying to control the other person and learning to love people as they are. I think it's so normal to love people on your terms and have this idea of, oh, if they're like this and it's easier for me. But a lot of that is just a reflection of ourselves and our own insecurities. So I appreciated that reminder to learn to let go in the context of relationships is there's even a story about Ajahn Brahm in his Opening the Door of Your Heart, which just, the core message is about, it doesn't matter what the conflict's over, sometimes just letting go. It doesn't matter who's right. And that's sort of another form of letting go in the more worldly sense, but just letting go over small things, because as Buddhists, especially, there's a much bigger picture than who was right about a certain point. So thank you for that, those illuminating points.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you for bringing up so many good points. In the main, I pick up 2 very good points from you, and if I may repeat them in a slightly different way, to join you in bringing up these good points. Thank you so much, Brooke. With regards to your second point about how well we've loved you, from Jack Confield as well, you brought up the issue of, I often say this to friends, relatives, and it pops up in the therapy room as well. Or rather, save the relationship than win an argument. Or rather, save the relationship than win in the argument. Yeah. And often I'll say to both parties, can we from this moment on focus on what can I say, what can I contribute that will improve our relationship instead of me being right and you being wrong. Yeah, to shift the argument, and to bring the right intentions to our way of speaking. Yeah, which is what you're emphasizing in your second point. Yeah, your first point, which is also from the slide of Pema Children, which I also elaborated on. It is so very important that we realize there are two sufferers in the room. There are two parties in the room, not just one. Yeah? And it's not coincidental. It's not surprising that on and off, by the middle phase of therapy, at the latest, I come up with phrases like, as a fellow sufferer, I would humbly say to you, Mary, da 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 da, di 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 di, John, as we are fellow, uh, um, if I may say, da 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 da, di 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 di, and that's a very respectful, gentle, caring, loving way of bringing up something that can be quite painful for the listener to look at and to self-reflect on. Yeah, this very concept that I'm not above suffering, and without having to make it explicit, without having to say, so many years ago I had exactly the same problem. No, 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 no. We don't go there. Yeah, not in the not in the role of the counselor to divulge too much of their. There is a place for self-disclosure, which is very controlled, but not to bring up our own suffering as if to tell the other, see, that happens to me. That's not the way to go. But the respectful way of saying, as a fellow human being, as a fellow, yeah, as a fellow husband, or as a fellow boyfriend or girlfriend, something like that. Yeah. Mm. Thank you, Brooke, for bringing up two very important points.
Great. There's another question in the chat, which I'll go through now, Dr. Tan, if you're happy to answer this. The question was about actually challenges that you have faced in relationships and how they've strengthened or informed the practices that you're provided in your professional life as well.
Mm. Mm. How much time have we got? When shall I
Plenty of
start?
time.
Is the person asking the question in the room still?
Yes, yeah.
Could we invite him or her to come on screen and perhaps make the question a little more specific, what he or she is looking for from me?
Yep. Brooke, would you be happy to ask specifically what you're after?
Yes, Brooke.
Yeah, sure. Hello. I was seeing as this is your kind of your life's work. I am curious about like the experience in your marriage and in your relationships and kind of maybe like the struggles you faced in them that actually helped you help other people better, if that makes sense.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, I will thank you for your very deep question, and I believe and I respect your very good intention to want to learn from my experiences. Yeah. So I'll speak in general, of course. Yeah. There are good reasons why we become therapists or counselors, though, aren't there? And it is therefore no wonder that in a lot of training programs, included the psychotherapy, analytic psychotherapy training I've gone through, our personal therapy is a compulsory part of the 3-tier training. Yeah. So I started my first personal therapy thinking that I don't need therapy, but I'll do it because it's part of the training course. And through that first therapy, I came to realize all the sufferings I've been through, all the sufferings I'm having right now, and all the ways that I'm human, yeah? And really appreciated and valued that first therapy experience with what they still call our training therapy, our training therapists, you know. So in a previous talk that I gave recently to a group of therapists on how I integrated Buddhism and psychotherapy together in helping others now, one of the interviewer, who's the head of Department of Mental Health and Social Society, Mental Health and Society, Dr. Nadine Levy from Nantian Institute, invited me to talk on the topic of integration. Her first question to me was, what led you to this area of integration? How come you got into integration? And it's a bit like your question, you know, Brooke. And I shared just as much. And then the question was raised from the public. So is it absolutely necessary for all therapists and counselors to have their own therapy and counseling? And my answer is, because there's no such thing as an absolute, I said preferably. And most very deep and long training to be therapists or counselors have personal therapy or training therapy, whatever you call it, as an essential as part of the training, yeah? Because it's through that one experiences one's own suffering and to work it through as much as possible, yeah? Of course, when I went through my training and when I completed my training, I then went to seek for another round of therapy with another therapist because I realized for me there was still some unfinished business that I wanted to further resolve, and I successfully found a second therapist for myself, and I'm so glad for that training. Yeah. So your question is very good, it's very deep, and it gives me an opportunity to share, yeah, what Pema Chondran and what you've been struck by presented just now, that often the one who has suffered a lot is the one who can help the most. When you look at the life of Thich Nhat Hanh, yeah, the Vietnamese monk who went through the Vietnam War, yeah, and who set up temples to help all the refugees and the aftermath of the Americans leaving Vietnam after the war had ended. The enormous suffering that he comes from the whole country, quite apart from the normal, ordinary suffering, being in samsara, born in that time, that place, from that family and that culture. Yeah. So I was just saying that it is absolutely what you're implying, Brooke. Yeah. It is through searching our own deepest, longest suffering from the past, and also to be able to tap into and to be aware of our current suffering. Mark Epstein has written 9 books that combines psychotherapy with Buddhism. And one of his books is The Trauma of Everyday Life. The trauma of everyday life, which is about the suffering of everyday life. How does Buddhism and psychotherapy addresses it? Yeah. Thank you, Brooke. Yeah.
Thank you for that answer. That's really insightful, and I hope at the end you can link all of these people and therapists and authors you've mentioned. Like hopefully, we can get a list of that so we can look at what we like. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Another book in that same vein, written by a therapist for therapists, is called Faces in the Cloud. Faces in the Cloud. And I'm still thinking about his name. It's a long time ago. That's right, Robert Stolorow. Stolorow, Robert Stolorow, from the analytic group called the Self-Psychologists, Faces in the Cloud. And he described, gave mention to 9 leading analysts from America who in their helping their analysts or their patients, their clients, touched upon and reflected on their own suffering, the faces in the clouds.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I have another question, Dr. Tan, that I'm going to combine some things from the chat. And this is perhaps a little bit of a technical question. So please bear with me. I'm curious to hear your perspective on what I see at times is the tendency for there to be a tension between Western psychology's focus generally on retrospective, so getting people to unpack and reflect on past events and events that have occurred in the past and how they've formed their character, with the Buddhist perspective, which is very much around impermanence and the present moment. So, listening to you speak, it almost seems like the solution for everything is the Noble Eightfold Path. It's quite simple. But then that to me doesn't open up this degree of, introspection or reflection of the past that you get particularly within a lot of the more psychological streams like cognitive behavioral therapy and a lot of those things or schemas where you're trying to make sense of the present on the basis of the past.
Absolutely.
So how do you reconcile these from your perspectives? Or can you maybe you can't reconcile them?
It can be reconciled, and it comes out in the word integration. And it also touches on what Brooke brought up just now in my response to Brooke. You're spot on in your very in-depth comment there, that yes, Western psychology, a lot of Western dynamic analytic psychotherapies is about unearthing the unconscious, which a lot of pain and suffering is from the past, from the developmental years, from childhood years. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. But having said that, I must also say, because tonight you've invited an analytic dynamic psychotherapist to talk, there are also today cognitive behavior therapists. Cognitive behavior therapists from the psychotherapy world, counseling world, they emphasize when we can change the thinking, cognition, and the behavior, we can change the person. Yeah. So generally speaking, people who want to be counseled or to be helped by being advised, guided, what do I do with my problem? How do I go forward? Cognitive behavior therapy is shorter term and is in a sense a quicker answer. Yeah. But for those people coming to therapy or for help who have deeper questions, why me? Why am I like that? Yeah. So it's not just what do I do now? Yeah. I don't have much time for therapy. Can you fix me in 12 sessions? Now, that cognitive behavior therapy can do its best, yeah, in 20 sessions usually. But those who ask why, yeah, leading to deeper and deeper questions, then the more analytic, the more dynamic psychotherapy is what you're referring to, that goes back to the past. In terms of coming to Buddhism for help, yeah, lots of people go to temples, lots of people seek our monastics because they come from some suffering that leads them to visit the temple, to the places of worship, their priests or their monks or nuns, yeah? Now, it depends on the background and the training of that monastic, yeah? But you're absolutely right. The majority of monastics will, shall we say, on the whole, emphasize on the here and now and mindfulness therapies, yeah? Mindfulness therapies. And there are so many very good mindfulness-based couples therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and when the anxiety levels are down, relationships improve. So there are so many mindfulness therapies that comes from monastics, that comes from elaborating on the aspects of mindfulness, including even um, what we call body-oriented psychotherapies. The body orientation comes from the embodiment theories and practices in Buddhism. Yeah, it's very much here and now. Yeah, but occasionally you will meet a psychotherapist, a monastic who has been exposed to different forms of Western psychology. And that's why in our Australian Association of Buddhist Counsellors and Psychotherapists, yeah, we invite and we put aside a certain number of spots for monastics to come and join our 2-year training course in Buddhist psychotherapy, which actually combines both Buddhism and psychotherapy. Yeah? And the monastics can contribute from the Buddhist side. And very often the monastics have registered and come to listen because they also want to learn from Western psychology. And in that sense, the more in-depth therapy, which is not just awareness, here now, mindfulness, yeah. And when we meet a monastic who also have a psychology degree, yeah, and when we meet a monastic who has also been trained as a counselor, yeah, we will invite them to even run some of our modules in our training course because they can then bring in the two seemingly divergent practices as you highlight. Yeah. The other interesting aspect is, Johnny, when it comes to the moment of helping, you will actually hear all experienced helpers, whether therapists, counselors, whether Buddhist, Christian, or whether a combination who has integrated the two together as much as they can. Ultimately, what comes forth in that moment is very similar and miles away from theory, because that practical moment of helping comes from the true nature of the individual. Yeah? And again, it comes from loving kindness, compassion, and all the values and virtues, all the paramis, yeah? And in the training from the psychotherapists, the same human values that come forth. So the moment-to-moment practical aspects of therapy comes from the values and virtues, the human values of relating. Yeah. But combining, integrating the two fields as much as we can. Is that okay, Johnny?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And a follow-up question that I have on that is, a lot of the ways that we navigate, particularly for people who might be going into therapy, is that it's a very, I suppose, individual exercise for people to do. And
Yes.
one thing that, came up quite a bit in your presentation was around, our interactions with people are needing to be based on understanding
Yes.
and forgiveness. But
Yes.
forgiveness is quite difficult to do at times. Like it is easy to hate people at times. It can be quite easy, or it's easier at times to jump into a more confrontational perspective. Like I know for, within my own life, in my work, I'm heavily involved with union activism. So that naturally can create this sort of us and them antagonism
Yeah.
that having understanding is much more difficult. I know I should, but it's hard. So do you have any tips on how we can navigate trying to be more forgiving to others, but also to ourselves in,
Absolutely.
when
Absolutely.
we aren't the best version of ourselves that we can be, how can we also practice that forgiveness for ourselves?
Johnny, I'm going into an area where you may have more answers than me. Because you are there in the hot seat. And so rightly you point out that in the nature of your work, when you have very often a hostile environment, very often party A and party B are trying to fight for their rights, isn't it? Through their union work, for wherever, is quite difficult, quite challenging to be calm and to be at peace, even in the negotiations, isn't it? Yeah. So you bring into sharp focus our difficulties, our human, ordinary difficulties in dealing with, let's say, just the aspect on forgiveness. Yeah. Of course, most therapies and most situations, that is not the entry ticket for discussion. But that area of forgiveness in negotiations, in conflict resolution, among mediators, among union workers, amongst different political parties, somewhere along the line, we first have to put our past hurts from each other on the table. Yeah, to actually put on the table honestly how each party, and even on the political stage, each country, how they feel they've been hurt, they've been damaged, they've been killed, by the other party, and to honestly, respectfully, non-violently put it on the table, to give the context, and if they can, and this is leading towards forgiveness, to also admit in what ways I have hurt the other party. Yeah, I have done wrong to the other party, to put it on the table, isn't it? And that then can naturally lead to, the areas we have to forgive each other and the areas we have to forgive ourselves. Because in the heat of the moment, we can lose perspective and we can do wrong things only to regret it later. Yeah. So that's the nature of forgiveness. Yeah. Now, the other thing to mention from the world of therapy is forgiveness is not an act. Forgiveness is a process, and is a long process. It can't be done in one session. Yeah. And also the timing of forgiveness. You can't bring in forgiveness until you can sense the party is ready, or the party is bringing up the issue of forgiveness. When that is brought up, or when the two parties involved or one party is beginning to bring in, making statements that are towards forgiveness, whether it's forgiving the other party or whether it's forgiving themselves or asking for forgiveness from the other, then you can accentuate and highlight and bring in more aspects of forgiveness because the time is right. Until then, you have to wait. You have to wait. You have to wait because a lot of heat, a lot of pain has to be first put on the table before the agenda of forgiveness can naturally flow in. If it doesn't naturally flow in, and if you feel you spend enough time for both parties, or for yourself and the other, and a lot of angst has been worked through, then you might slip in forgiveness, even with a sense of humor, bring in a bit of forgiveness, or quoting a saying from here and there to gently edge in towards the topic of forgiveness. And once forgiveness is on the table for both parties, not just one, then you also want to remember you need many, many sessions. It's not the first and the last session on forgiveness, because you open up a huge area that you can have a lot of benefit by pursuing it bit by bit by bit. A lot of tears have to be wept. A lot of forgiving the others has to be practiced face to face. And most difficult, who's the person you will find most difficult to forgive? It's ourselves. When that is on the table, that helps both parties very deeply. Yeah. I better stop at that, Johnny.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for that. That was a really great answer. I'm really thankful for your response for that. Did anyone have any final questions? It is 8:27, so if you have a rapid fire question, now is the time to ask. Okay, we got one quickly in the chat, which I'll read out for you. Would you agree that the practice of Buddhism, getting rid of defilements, is like self-therapy? If you do, how should we deal with the thoughts that come up during meditation?
The same way, as if you're viewing it as self-therapy, yeah? The self-therapy in unwholesome thoughts, wholesome thoughts is one of the slides just now, yeah? So you want to recognize it's unwholesome, yeah? And you want to let it go, let it go, let it go. Yeah? And when it's a wholesome thought, recognize the wholesome thought and encourage, yeah? And maintain some more wholesome thoughts. So that's the self-therapy in insight-oriented meditations, when we get to the level of realizing from our mind, moment to moment, thoughts come up, feelings come up, different, changing, and we keep a watchful eye on whether they're wholesome or unwholesome. If they're wholesome, we encourage them, we remember them, we repeat them. Yeah, remember the slide on positivity? Yeah, that one. And if it's unwholesome, to be able to pick it up early, recognize them, and look at ways of letting go the unwholesome, letting go the unwholesome, and watch what leads us to those unwholesome thoughts, feelings, or whatever, yeah, and avoid going there, as part of letting go, For example, when someone is suffering from alcohol problem, when they even begin to think about, as I'm driving home today, I'll drop in with the drive-by and buy a bottle of beer, So the very thought of driving home, that journey, that unwholesome thought comes up, and they tell themselves, no. And then the wholesome thought comes, maybe I should change my journey going home, not to pass by the liquor shop. Yeah, just as a simple example of encouraging, maintaining wholesome thoughts, removing, letting go, reducing unwholesome thoughts. That's part of, if you like, self-therapy, yeah?
Thank you so much. That, I think, is a really wonderful way to wrap up what has been a phenomenal conversation tonight. So thank you so much, Dr. Tan, for your really insightful presentation and for the wonderful advice and sharing that you've provided for us in the latter half of this. Before we wrap up, just a few quick announcements, as always. So this week, we have the usual suite of Metta Center offerings. So tomorrow we have yoga. Wednesday we have Wellness Wednesdays, I believe the name is. I don't believe there is anything on this week. Yes, I do. On Sunday, it is Santi Sundays at Parramatta. So you can find more details about that either early in the chat or on the Metta Center website. And I look forward to emceeing you again next Monday, where we have I believe Venerable Moyen is joining us again for another time. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much, Dr. Tan, for your wonderful presentation. Thank you all for your great questions and your great attention to this. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you, Johnny, for emceeing so well, chairing so well. And thank you all to all the participants, and especially to those who've contributed with your such good comments and such good questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tan.
Thank you so much, Johnny.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Dr.
Thank
Tan, Johnny, and everyone.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
sadhu.